The frozen winds of Keth Prime howled across the black mountains like angry spirits. Commander Nara stood on the highest tower of her fortress, watching the ice crystals dance in the pale light of 3 distant suns. Her golden eyes showed no emotion as she looked out over the battlefield where her soldiers had won another victory against the humans. The war had been going on for 5 years now. The humans wanted to settle on worlds that belonged to the Kethzini. They spoke of peace and sharing, but Nara knew better. In the cold universe, only the strong survived. The weak died and were forgotten. Her scaled skin was dark green, almost black in some places. Long scars ran down her arms and face, each one telling a story of battle. The largest scar went from her left eye to her jaw. She had earned it when she killed 3 human soldiers with her bare hands during her first command. Nara turned away from the window and walked down the stone steps to the main hall of her fortress. Her boots made sharp sounds on the cold floor. 2 young Kethani soldiers stood guard at the entrance. They straightened their backs when they saw her coming. "Commander," the first soldier said with a bow. "The prisoners from the human settlement are ready for questioning," Amini Nara asked. Her voice was cold and sharp like breaking ice. 15 adults and 3 children, the second soldier replied. "We also captured one of their engineers. He might have useful information about their defense systems." Nara nodded. She had no time for the weak ones. Children and old humans were useless to her. Only the strong ones who could work or fight had any value. The rest would be sent to the ice mines where they would freeze to death within a month. She walked through the corridors of her fortress. The walls were made of black stone that never grew warm, even when fires burned in the great fireplaces. Kethani preferred the cold. It made them strong and ready for battle. Humans always complained about the cold, which proved they were weak. In the prisoners' holding area, 15 humans sat on the floor, with their hands tied behind their backs. They wore thin clothes that did nothing to protect them from the cold. Most of them were shivering. Some were crying. One old man was trying to comfort a woman who looked sick. Nara studied each prisoner with her golden eyes. She could smell their fear. It was sweet and sharp, like blood on snow. Fear was good. It made prisoners tell the truth quickly. She pointed at a tall man with brown hair. "You are the engineer." The man looked up at her but did not speak. He had brave eyes, she noticed. Most humans looked away when she stared at them. This one kept looking back at her. "What is your name?" she asked. "Day," the man said. His voice was steady, which surprised her. "You will tell me about the human defense systems on Colony World 7, Nara said. "If you speak the truth, you will live longer. If you lie, you will die today." Day did not answer right away. He looked at the other prisoners, especially at the 3 children who were crying quietly in the corner. Then he looked back at Nara. "I will not help you kill more innocent people," he said. The other Kethani soldiers in the room grew angry. One of them stepped forward and raised his weapon, but Nara held up her hand to stop him. She was interested in this human who was not afraid to say no to her. "Innocent." She repeated the word slowly. "There are no innocent beings in war. There are only the strong and the weak. Your people chose to fight us. Now they pay the price." "Your people attacked first," Day said. "We only wanted to find new homes for our families." Nara laughed, but it was not a happy sound. The universe does not care what you want. It only cares about who is strong enough to take what they need. She walked closer to Day until she was standing right in front of him. He was tall for a human, but she was still taller. Her shadow fell over him like a dark cloud. "I have killed more humans than you have fingers and toes," she said quietly. "I have burned your settlements and taken your people as slaves. Do you know why?" Day did not answer, but his eyes never left her face. "Because I can," Nara continued. "Because I am stronger than you. Because that is the way of the universe." She turned away from the prisoners and walked toward the door. "Take the engineer to the questioning room," she told her soldiers. "Kill the others. They are useless." "Wait," Day called out. "If you let the others go, I will answer your questions." Nara stopped walking. She turned around slowly to look at him again. "You would trade your life for theirs?" "Yes," Day said without hesitation. The other prisoners looked at him with wide eyes. Some of them were crying harder now. The 3 children moved closer to their parents. "Foolish," Nara said. "You gain nothing by saving them. They will die anyway when we attack their next settlement." "Maybe," Day said. "But not today. Not because of me." Nara stared at him for a long moment. She had seen many humans beg for their lives. She had seen them offer money or information or anything they thought might save them. But she had never seen one offer to die for strangers. "Very well," she said finally. "The others will work in the mines instead of dying today. But you will tell me everything I want to know." As the soldiers led the other prisoners away, Nara found herself thinking about the engineer named Day. There was something different about him, something she did not understand. She walked through more corridors until she reached her private chambers at the top of the fortress. The room was large and cold, with windows that looked out over the frozen landscape. A fire burned in the fireplace, but it gave off little warmth. On the corner of the room, a small figure sat reading from a datapad. It was Kes, her offspring. The young Kethany was smaller than others of the same age, with scales that were lighter green than Nara's. Kes looked up when Nara entered the room. "Mother," Kes said in a quiet voice, "did the raid go well?" "Yes," Nara replied. She did not sit down or move closer to her offspring. "We captured valuable prisoners and destroyed another human outpost." Kes nodded and looked back at the datapad. Nara watched her offspring for a moment. Kes was weak, she knew. Too small, too quiet, too gentle. In Kethany society, such weakness was dangerous. Other commanders already whispered that Nara's offspring would never be a proper warrior. But Kes was hers, the only family she had left after her mate died in battle 3 years ago. She would make Kes strong, even if it took years of hard training. "What are you reading?" Nara asked. "Stories about the old wars," Kes replied. "When our people first left the homeworld to find new places to live. Those were the greatest Kethany who ever lived," Nara said. "They conquered 12 worlds and built an empire that lasted 1,000 years. They understood that only the strong deserved to survive." Kes looked up at her mother again. Were they happy? The question surprised Nara. She had never thought about whether the great warriors of old were happy. Happiness was not important. Strength was important. Victory was important. Survival was important. "Happiness is for the weak," she told her offspring. "The strong do what they must do, whether it makes them happy or not." Kes nodded, but Nara could see doubt in the young one's eyes. This was another sign of weakness that worried her. A true Kethany warrior never doubted the old ways. That night, as Nara stood watch over her fortress, she thought again about the human engineer. His willingness to die for strangers made no sense to her. In Kethany culture, you protected your family and your clan. Everyone else was an enemy or a tool to be used. But something about Day's actions stayed in her mind like a small stone in her boot, uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. The wind grew stronger as the night went on, bringing with it the smell of coming storms. In the distance, Nara could see dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The weather reports had warned of unusual atmospheric conditions, but she paid little attention to such things. After all, she was Kethany, cold, and storms were nothing to her people. They had survived worse things than weather. She had no way of knowing that the storm coming toward her world would change everything she believed about strength, weakness, and what it truly meant to survive. 3 days after the raid, the weather monitoring station sent an urgent message to all military bases across Keth Prime. Commander Nara read the report while standing in her command center, surrounded by glowing screens and busy officers. The message was short but alarming. A massive ice storm was forming in the northern regions of the planet. The storm was unlike anything seen in over 200 years. Temperatures would drop to levels that could kill even the cold-adapted Kethany. The storm would cover half the planet, including Nara's fortress. "How long do we have?" Nara asked the communications officer. 18 hours, Commander, the young Kethany replied. "Maybe 20 if the storm moves slower than predicted." Nara studied the weather maps on the main screen. The storm looked like a giant white spiral, growing larger every hour. Red warning symbols covered most of the continent. Even the underground bunkers would not be safe from this kind of cold. "What caused this storm?" she asked. The science officer stepped forward nervously. "The orbital bombardments from last month damaged the upper atmosphere. The energy fields that normally protect us from space cold are broken. This storm is pulling ice directly from space into our atmosphere." Nara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her own weapons had caused this disaster. The massive bombs she had used to destroy human settlements had torn holes in the planet's natural defenses. About an hour later, High Command sent evacuation orders to all military bases in the storm's path. The message was clear and cold, just like all military communications, essential personnel only. Priority equipment first. Everyone else would have to find their own way to safety. Nara read the list of essential personnel. Her name was at the top, of course. Below it were the names of her senior officers, her best pilots, and her most skilled technicians. At the bottom was a note that made her blood freeze. Dependents and non-combat personnel are not authorized for priority evacuation. Local commanders may use their discretion for remaining transport space. Kes was not on the list. Her offspring, barely 10 years old, was considered non-essential by High Command. According to military law, Kes would only be evacuated if there was extra room after all the important people and equipment were loaded. Nara crushed the datapad in her hand. The metal cracked and the screen went dark. Her officers looked at her with worry, but none of them dared to speak. "Begin evacuation procedures." She ordered all essential personnel and equipment to the transport ships. "We leave in 16 hours. "What about the prisoners?" "Commander," asked her second officer. "Leave them," Nara said without thinking. "They are not our concern." But even as she said the words, she thought about Day, the human engineer who had offered to die for strangers. He would be left behind to freeze in the storm. Somehow, this bothered her more than it should have. The next few hours passed quickly. Soldiers ran through the fortress corridors carrying weapons, supplies, and important documents. The transport ships landed on the frozen ground outside the fortress walls. Their engines made loud roaring sounds as they prepared for takeoff. Nara stood in her private chambers, packing only the most necessary items. She looked at Kes, who was sitting quietly on the bed, watching the activity with big eyes. "Mother," Kes said softly, "am I coming with you?" The question hit Nara like a physical blow. She had been trying not to think about it, but now she had to face the truth. There might not be room for Kes on the evacuation ships. "Of course you are coming," she lied. "Pack your warmest clothes and your study materials." Kes smiled and began putting things into a small bag. Nara watched her offspring move around the room, gathering books and clothes. The young Kethany moved slowly, carefully, always thinking before acting, so different from the quick, aggressive movements that Kethany warriors were taught from birth. 2 hours before the evacuation deadline, Nara's second officer came to her chambers with bad news. "Commander, we have a problem," he said. "The transport ships are overloaded. High Command sent additional equipment at the last minute. Scientific instruments and weapon systems that cannot be left behind." "What does that mean?" Nara asked, though she already knew the answer. "There is no room for non-essential personnel. The dependents will have to stay behind." Nara looked at Kes, who was still packing her bag. Her offspring had not heard the conversation, but somehow seemed to understand that something was wrong. "How many dependents?" Nara asked quietly. 43, including children and elderly family members of the base personnel. "And how much space would they take one transport ship?" "Commander, but that ship is already loaded with the new scientific equipment." Nara walked to the window and looked out at the transport ships. Their engines were glowing in the dim light of the 3 suns. Soon they would lift off and carry the essential personnel to safety on the other side of the planet. The storm clouds were already visible on the northern horizon. They looked like a black wall stretching from the ground to the top of the sky. Lightning flashed inside the clouds, but it was not normal lightning. It was blue and white, the color of frozen electricity. "What would happen if we left the scientific equipment behind?" Nara asked. Her second officer looked shocked. "Commander, those instruments are worth more than 100 soldiers. High Command specifically ordered us to save them. They are essential for future military operations, and 43 lives are not essential." "Not according to military law," the officer replied. "We must follow orders, Commander. The equipment comes first." Nara turned away from the window. She looked at Kes, who had finished packing and was now sitting quietly on the bed. Her offspring's scales were pale with worry, but Kes did not complain or ask questions. "Leave me," Nara told her officer. "I need to think." After the officer left, Nara sat down next to Kes on the bed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind was getting stronger. The storm was still hours away, but its influence was already being felt. "Mother," Kes said finally, "are we really going on the ships?" Nara looked into her offspring's eyes. They were golden like her own, but softer somehow, less hard and cold. There was trust there, and love, and hope that everything would be all right. "I do not know," Nara said. It was the first time she had admitted uncertainty to her offspring. Nodded, as if this answer made perfect sense. "If we stay, will we be safe in the fortress?" "No," Nara said. "The storm will be too strong. The fortress will become very cold, colder than anything we have ever experienced. Will we die?" The question was asked so simply, that it took Nara's breath away. Kes was not afraid, just curious about what might happen. "We might," Nara said honestly. Kes was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took her mother's hand. Her small fingers were warm against Nara's scales. "I am not afraid," Kes said. "If we stay together, I am not afraid of anything." Something broke inside Nara's chest. A feeling she had never experienced before spread through her body like warm water. It was stronger than fear, stronger than anger, stronger than anything she had ever felt. She realized that she would rather die with Kes than live without her offspring. This thought terrified her more than any enemy she had ever faced. It meant that she was becoming weak. It meant that she was forgetting the most important rule of Kethany's survival. But she could not help herself. She loved Kes more than her own life. An hour later, Nara made her decision. She would use her authority as base commander to make room for the dependents on the evacuation ships. She would leave behind some of the scientific equipment that High Command valued so highly. Called her second officer to her chambers and gave the order. The officer argued with her, reminded her of military law, warned her that she would face court-martial for disobeying direct orders. "I will face the consequences later," Nara said. "Right now, we save everyone we can." But even as she gave the order, she knew it might be too late. The storm was moving faster than predicted. The black clouds were already covering the northern mountains. The temperature was dropping quickly. The evacuation ships had less than 2 hours to finish loading and take off. After that, they would be trapped on the ground until the storm passed. If it passed, Nara looked out the window one more time. The storm was coming like a giant beast made of ice and wind and darkness. It would test everything she believed about strength and weakness, about what it meant to survive. She did not know that in the depths of the fortress, the human engineer named Day was also watching the storm approach. He was thinking about the Kethany who had shown him an unexpected moment of mercy. He was wondering if he would have a chance to return that mercy before the ice came for them all. The storm hit Keth Prime like the fist of an angry god. The first wave of ice wind struck the fortress at exactly 1400 hours, 3 hours earlier than predicted. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 10 minutes. Commander Nara was in the transport bay when the storm arrived. She was supervising the loading of the last dependents onto the evacuation ships when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in seconds later, bathing everything in red light. "Commander," her pilot shouted over the growing wind. "We need to leave now. The engines cannot start in this cold." Nara looked around the transport bay. Most of the essential personnel were already on board the ships. Kes stood near the entrance to the last transport, holding her small bag of belongings. 40 other dependents waited behind her, including the 3 human children from the prison. "Load everyone," Nara ordered. "We leave in 5 minutes." But as she spoke, a massive gust of wind hit the fortress. The transport bay doors, each weighing several tons, groaned and twisted under the pressure. Ice crystals as sharp as knives flew through the air, like deadly snow. The first transport ship tried to take off. Its engines roared and it lifted 10 feet off the ground. Then the ice wind caught it and threw it sideways into the fortress wall. The ship exploded in a ball of orange fire that was quickly swallowed by the white storm. "All ships down," the pilot yelled. "Repeat, all ships down. No takeoff possible in these conditions." Nara felt her heart stop. They were trapped, all of them, essential personnel, dependents, and prisoners alike. The storm had arrived too fast and too strong for anyone to escape. "Emergency procedures," she shouted to her officers. "Move everyone to the lower levels. Seal all entrances. This is now a survival situation." The next hour was chaos. Soldiers and civilians ran through the corridors carrying supplies and equipment. The fortress shook with each gust of wind. Windows cracked and then shattered, letting in air so cold it burned their lungs. Nara led Kes and the other dependents to the deepest level of the fortress. It was a storage area normally used for weapons and food supplies. The walls were thick stone and the ceiling was low. It was the safest place they could find. As they settled into the underground chamber, Nara counted heads. 63 people in total. 27 soldiers, 21 dependents, and 15 prisoners. Among the prisoners was the human engineer named Day. The heating system failed 2 hours after the storm began. The massive generators that warmed the fortress could not handle the extreme cold. Ice began forming on the walls inside the chamber. Everyone's breath came out in white clouds. "How long will the storm last?" asked one of the soldiers. His voice was shaking, either from cold or fear. "The weather report said 3 days, Nara replied. "Maybe 4. "We will all be dead by then," another soldier said. "No one can survive for days in this cold without heat." Nara looked around the chamber. Already, some of the dependents were shivering badly. The 3 human children were huddled together, their lips turning blue. Even the adult Kethany were struggling with the temperature. "We need to conserve body heat," she said. Everyone moved closer together, share blankets and clothing. But she knew it would not be enough. The temperature was still dropping. Soon it would be too cold for any living thing to survive, even in the deepest part of the fortress. Cass sat next to her mother, wrapped in 2 blankets but still shivering. Her scales had turned pale green, almost white. This was a bad sign. When Kethany got too cold, their scales lost color, and their blood moved slower. Mother Kes whispered, "I am very cold." Nara pulled her offspring closer and wrapped her own coat around the small body. But she could feel how cold Kes was getting. The young Kethany's breathing was becoming shallow and slow. "Stay awake," Nara told her offspring. "Keep talking to me. Tell me about the stories you were reading." But Kes's eyes were starting to close. The extreme cold was making her sleepy. If she fell asleep now, she might never wake up. Panic filled Nara's chest. For the first time in her adult life, she felt completely helpless. All her strength, all her weapons, all her military training meant nothing against the power of the storm. She could not fight the cold. She could not defeat it or command it to stop. She looked around the chamber desperately, searching for anything that might help. Her eyes fell on the human engineer sitting near the far wall. Day was watching the Kethany with careful eyes. He did not look as cold as the others, even though humans were supposed to be weaker in low temperatures. "Yo," she called to him. "Human, come here." Day stood up and walked over to where Nara sat with Kes. Several Kethany soldiers raised their weapons, but Nara waved them back. "You are an engineer," she said. "Can you fix the heating system?" Day looked down at Kes, who was now barely conscious in her mother's arms. His face showed something that surprised Nara. It was the same expression she had seen on the faces of human parents when their children were in danger. "The main generators are frozen," he said quietly. But there might be backup systems in the lower mechanical levels, emergency heaters that run on different power sources. Show me, Nara demanded. I would have to go alone, Day said. The mechanical levels are flooded with ice water and poisonous gases from the damaged systems. It would be suicide for anyone to go with me. Then why would you do it? Nara asked. Day looked at Kess again. The young Kethany's breathing was so shallow now that her chest barely moved. Then he looked at the 3 human children who were in the same condition. Because children should not die because of adult wars, he said simply. One of the Kethany soldiers laughed harshly. The human wants to be a hero. Let him go and die, if he wants to. It is one less mouth to feed. But Nara was staring at Day with new understanding. This human enemy was offering to risk his life to save her offspring, not for reward or freedom or revenge, just because it was the right thing to do. What do you need? She asked. Tools for the heating system, and someone to watch over the children while I am gone. All of them, human and Kethany alike. You have my word, Nara said. If you can restore heat to this chamber, I will protect every child here with my life. Day nodded. That is all I ask. He spent the next 20 minutes gathering tools and studying old blueprints of the fortress. Nara watched him work with growing amazement. He was careful and methodical, checking every detail twice. This was not the behavior of someone planning to escape or cause sabotage. This was someone preparing to save lives. Before he left, Day did something that shocked everyone in the chamber. He took off his heavy thermal jacket and handed it to Nara. For the young one, he said, pointing at Kess. She needs it more than I do. Nara stared at the jacket in her hands. It was still warm from Day's body heat. She looked up at him, standing there in just a thin shirt, already shivering from the cold. You will freeze without this, she said. Maybe, Day replied. But she will definitely freeze without it. He turned and walked toward the door that led to the mechanical levels. Before he opened it, he looked back at the chamber full of enemies and strangers and children who needed help. Take care of each other, he said. That is what makes us different from the cold. Then he opened the door and stepped into the darkness beyond. Ice wind howled through the opening for a moment before the door sealed shut again. Nara wrapped the warm jacket around Kess. Almost immediately, her offspring's breathing became deeper and more regular. The jacket was saving Kess's life, given freely by a human who had every reason to hate them. As she held her offspring and waited for Day to return, Nara found herself thinking about strength and weakness in ways she had never considered before. Was it strength to fight only for yourself and your own people? Or was it strength to fight for anyone who needed help, even your enemies? The storm raged above them, but down in the chamber, something was changing in Commander Nara's understanding of what it truly meant to be strong. 2 hours passed in the cold chamber, 2 hours that felt like 2 years. Commander Nara held Kess close, feeling her offspring's breathing slowly return to normal thanks to Day's warm jacket. But the chamber was still getting colder. Ice crystals formed on the stone walls. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Several of the older dependents had stopped shivering, which was a bad sign. When someone got too cold, their body stopped trying to warm itself. The human is dead, one of the soldiers said. His name was Jun, and he was one of Nara's most loyal officers. No one can survive in the mechanical levels without proper protection. He knew he would die when he went down there, another soldier added. Humans do stupid things when they are desperate, but Nara did not think Day's choice was stupid. She thought about how he had looked at Kess before taking off his jacket. There had been no hesitation in his eyes, no doubt about what he needed to do. He had seen a child in danger and acted to save her. This was not desperation. This was something else. Something Nara was beginning to understand for the first time in her life. Mother Kess whispered. Is the human coming back? I do not know, Nara said honestly. He is trying to help us. But it is very dangerous where he went. I hope he comes back, Kess said quietly. His jacket is warm, but I think he is warm inside too, in his heart. Kess's words hit Nara like a physical blow. Her offspring, barely 10 years old, had seen something in the human engineer that Nara was only just beginning to recognize. Warmth that had nothing to do with temperature, strength that had nothing to do with weapons or violence. 3 hours after Day had left, they heard sounds from the mechanical levels, banging and scraping, like metal hitting metal. Then silence again. He found something, Jun said. Maybe the backup generators, or maybe he is dying and hitting things in his death struggle. Another soldier replied coldly. Nara wanted to go after Day, to help him, or at least see what was happening. But she could not leave Kess. Her offspring needed the warmth of her body to survive, and she had given her word to protect all the children in the chamber. 4 hours passed, then 5. The temperature kept dropping. Some of the dependents had fallen into the deep sleep that comes before freezing to death. The 3 human children were barely conscious, huddled together in one corner. Nara made a decision that would have shocked her younger self. She gathered all the children together, human and Kethany alike, and had the adults form a circle around them. Body heat was shared equally, without regard for species or allegiance. Commander, Jun protested. We should not waste our warmth on human children. They are enemies. They are children first, Nara said firmly. Enemies second. That is not the Kethany way, Jun replied. Maybe the Kethany way is wrong, Nara said. The words came out before she could stop them. Her soldiers stared at her with shock and disbelief. No Kethany commander had ever questioned their people's most sacred beliefs, but Nara found that she meant what she said. As she looked at the human children shivering next to Kes, she could not see enemies. She could only see young beings who needed protection. 6 hours after Day had left, they heard new sounds. Footsteps in the corridor outside the chamber, slow, dragging footsteps like someone who could barely walk. The door opened with a grinding sound. Day stumbled into the chamber, his clothes torn and his skin blue with cold. Ice covered his hair and eyebrows. He was shaking so badly he could barely stand, but he was alive. And behind him, warm air began flowing into the chamber. Emergency. Heaters, he said through chattering teeth. Found 3 working units in the lower levels. Should be enough to keep this chamber warm. The soldiers helped him to the center of the chamber where the shared warmth was greatest. Nara looked at this human who had risked everything to save them all. His lips were blue and his fingers were white with frostbite. He had nearly died in the frozen mechanical levels. Why? She asked him. Why did you do this for us? Day looked around the chamber at the mix of Kethany and human faces. Because that is what we do, he said simply. We help each other survive, even your enemies. Nara asked. Children are not enemies, Day replied. They are just children. As the emergency heaters warmed the chamber, Nara felt something changing inside her chest. It was like ice melting, but the ice was around her heart. For 30 years, she had believed that strength meant being hard and cold and merciless. But this human had shown her a different kind of strength. The strength to risk your life for strangers. The strength to give up your warmth so others could live. The strength to see enemies as people who needed help. You saved my offspring, she told Day. You saved all of them. We saved each other, Day corrected her. That is how survival really works. Nara looked at Kes, who was now warm and alert thanks to Day's jacket and the emergency heating. Her Ptony heating. Offspring was watching the human with bright, curious eyes. Thank you, Kes said to Day. You are very brave. Day smiled, and despite his exhaustion and frostbite, it was a warm smile. You are very brave too, he told her. All of you are brave. Over the next few hours, as the emergency heaters kept them warm, something remarkable happened in the chamber. The divisions between Kethany and human, between captor and prisoner, began to disappear. People shared food and water without being asked. They took turns keeping watch while others slept. They told stories to keep the children entertained. Nara watched it all with growing amazement. This was not weakness, as she had been taught to believe. This was strength of a kind she had never imagined. The strength that came from caring about others, even when they were different from you. When Jun complained that they were being too soft with the human prisoners, Nara silenced him with a look. These humans risked their lives to save our children. She said, they have earned our respect. Respect for enemies. Jun asked in disbelief. Respect for anyone who chooses to protect the helpless. Nara replied. She realized that Day had given her more than warm air and working heaters. He had given her a new understanding of what it meant to be strong. Not the cold, hard strength she had known all her life, but warm strength. The kind that grew larger when it was shared instead of smaller. As the first day of the storm passed into night, Nara sat next to Day and Kes, watching over all the children in the chamber. Human and Kethany alike, they slept peacefully in the warmth that one brave man had restored to them. For the first time in her life, Commander Nara understood what compassion really meant, and she knew that she would never be the same again. The storm raged for 3 more days above the fortress. But in the warm chamber below, something beautiful was happening. Humans and Kethany were learning to live together as one community. Commander Nara watched it all with eyes that saw the world differently now. She saw Day teaching Kes how to fix small mechanical problems using simple tools. She saw her soldiers sharing their food rations with human children without being ordered to do so. She saw the 3 human children playing games with young Keth, laughing together as if war had never existed. This is impossible, Jun said to her on the 2nd day. Humans and Kethany cannot live in peace. We are too different, are we? Nara asked. She pointed to where Kes was sitting with one of the human children, a girl named Min, who was about the same age. They were looking at pictures in a book together, taking turns reading the words aloud. Look at them, Nara continued. Do you see enemies? Or do you see children who have found friendship in a dark place? Jun looked uncomfortable. Children do not understand the real world. When they grow up, they will remember that they are supposed to be enemies. Only if we teach them to be enemies, Nara replied. What if we taught them something else instead? The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the chamber entrance. One of the older Kethany dependents, a woman named Hannah, had collapsed. She was burning with fever and breathing with difficulty. Day immediately went to examine her. His Gentle hands checked her temperature and listened to her breathing. Lung infection, he said. The cold air damaged her breathing passages. She needs medicine or she will die. We have no medicine, one of the soldiers said. The medical supplies are in the upper levels, frozen solid by now. I know where there might be some, Day said quietly. In my original transport ship, before we were captured, it crashed in the northern valley, but it might still have medical supplies. That ship is buried under 20 feet of snow, Jun said, and the valley is in the heart of the storm. No one could reach it and survive. Day was quiet for a moment, thinking, then he looked at Hannah, who was getting worse by the hour. Someone has to try, he said. You are not going anywhere, Nara said firmly. You nearly died in the mechanical levels. I will not let you risk your life again. Then Hannah will die, Day said simply. And maybe others too. The infection could spread in these close quarters. Nara felt torn between two impossible choices. Let Day risk his life again, or watch helpless people die from disease. Both options went against everything she was learning about compassion and protection. I will go, she said suddenly. I am stronger and better equipped for the cold. No, Day said, you need to stay with Kes and the other children. They need their protector here. Then we are all stuck, Jun said. No one can go. The storm is too dangerous. But Day was already putting on his torn jacket and gathering supplies. I made a promise, he said, to help everyone survive. That includes Hannah. Nara watched him prepare for another suicide mission. This human kept choosing to risk everything for people he barely knew, people who had been his enemies just days before. Wait, she said, if you must go, take this. She removed her own military coat, the one with armor plating and built-in heating units. It was designed to keep a Kethany alive in the worst conditions. I cannot take your coat, Day protested. You need it to stay warm. I have the chamber heaters and 62 other people to share warmth with, Nara said. You will be alone in the storm. You need it more than I do. Day stared at the coat in amazement. It was the finest piece of survival gear he had ever seen. More importantly, it was a gift from someone who had every reason to hate him. Thank you, he said softly. I will bring it back to you. Just bring yourself back. Nara replied. The coat can be replaced. You cannot. As Day prepared to leave, the entire chamber gathered around him. Kethany soldiers who had wanted to kill him days before now offered advice about surviving in the storm. Human children drew pictures for him to carry for good luck. Kes gave him a small piece of metal she had shaped into a star. So you remember to come back to us, she told him. Nara realized that Day had become more than just a prisoner or even a helpful stranger. He had become part of their family. This makeshift family of former enemies who had learned to care about each other. Be careful, she told him as he prepared to open the chamber door. The world needs more people like you. The world needs more people like all of us, Day replied. People who choose to help instead of hurt. He stepped into the howling storm and disappeared into the white darkness. The chamber door sealed behind him, leaving 62 people to wait and worry and hope. For the next 18 hours, Nara paced the chamber like a caged animal. She kept checking on Hannah, whose condition was getting worse. She tried to comfort the children who were worried about Day. She attempted to organize activities to keep everyone's minds off their fears, but mostly she thought about how much had changed inside her own heart. A week ago, she would have seen Day's mission as foolish and wasteful. One life risked to save another, with no guarantee of success. Military logic said it was better to let one person die than risk losing two. Now, she understood that military logic missed the most important point. Some things were worth risking everything for. The life of an innocent person was one of those things. The chance to show compassion was another. He will come back, Kes said, sitting beside her mother. I know he will. How can you be so sure? Nara asked. Because he promised, Kes said simply. And because he cares about Hannah. People who care about others always find a way. Nara looked at her offspring with new respect. Somewhere in the past few days, Kes had learned lessons about human nature that Nara was only beginning to understand. The young Kethany saw the world with eyes unclouded by prejudice and fear. 20 hours after Day had left, the chamber door opened again. He stumbled inside, covered in ice and snow, carrying a medical kit from his crashed ship. He was exhausted and half frozen, but alive. Found it, he gasped, holding up the medical supplies. Antibiotics and fever reducers should be enough to help Hannah. Nara caught him as he collapsed from exhaustion. His lips were blue again and his hands were shaking, but his eyes were bright with triumph. He had done the impossible and saved another life. As they administered medicine to Hannah and warmed Day back to health, Nara reflected on what she had witnessed. This human had now risked his life twice to save Kethany people, not for reward or recognition, but simply because it was the right thing to do. She began to understand that compassion was not a weakness that made you vulnerable. It was a strength that made you capable of incredible things. It gave you the courage to face any danger if it meant protecting others. Thank you, she told Day as he recovered by the heaters. For Hannah, for all of us. We take care of each other, Day said, repeating his simple philosophy. That is what makes us strong. Nara nodded, finally understanding what he meant. Individual strength was limited, but the strength that came from caring about others, from working together and protecting each other, had no limits at all. She looked around the chamber at their strange family of former enemies. They had survived the worst storm in 2 centuries, not through weapons or violence, but through compassion and cooperation. It was a lesson she would never forget. On the 4th day, the storm finally ended. The howling winds became whispers, then silence. The emergency heating units had kept everyone alive, and Hannah was recovering well thanks to the medicine Day had risked his life to retrieve. When rescue ships arrived from the southern continent, they found something no one expected. In the deep chamber of the fortress, 63 beings were living together in harmony. Humans and Kethany shared food, told stories, and cared for each other's children as if species barriers had never existed. The rescue team leader, a Kethany general named Wu, stared in disbelief at the scene. "Commander Nara," he said coldly, "explain why human prisoners are moving freely among our people." Nara stood up slowly. She had been dreading this moment, but she was ready for it. "Because they are not prisoners anymore, General. They are the people who saved our lives." "Impossible," General Wu said. "Humans cannot be trusted. They are our enemies." "These humans chose to risk their lives to save Kethany's children," Nara replied. "They shared their warmth and their food when they could have kept it for themselves. They worked to repair our heating systems when they could have. Let us free." "Tell me, General, what definition of enemy includes people who save your life?" General Wu's face grew dark with anger. "You have been corrupted by prolonged contact with the enemy. You will face court-martial for these violations of military law." "So be it," Nara said calmly. "I would rather face judgment for showing mercy than live with the knowledge that I let innocent people die." The evacuation to the southern continent took most of the day. The humans in Kethany were separated again, loaded onto different ships. Nara watched sadly as her makeshift family was broken apart by military protocol. Day was loaded onto a prisoner transport with the other humans. Before the ship took off, he managed to catch Nara's eye through the small window. He smiled and touched his chest where his heart was, then pointed at her. The message was clear. What had happened in the chamber would stay in his heart forever. Kes cried as the human children were taken away. "Why cannot we stay together?" she asked her. "Mother, we were happy together. We took care of each other." "Because some people are afraid of happiness when it comes from unexpected places," Nara said. "But do not worry. What we learned in that chamber will stay with us forever." 3 weeks later, Nara stood before a military tribunal on the capital world of the Kethany Empire. 5 generals sat behind a metal table, their golden eyes cold and judgmental. The charges against her were serious. Fraternization with enemy prisoners, disobedience of direct orders, conduct unbecoming a officer. "Commander Nara," the chief judge said, "you stand accused of betraying the fundamental principles of Kethany military service. How do you plead?" "Not guilty," Nara said firmly. "I betrayed nothing except ignorance and hatred." "Explain yourself," the judge demanded. Nara took a deep breath. She had rehearsed this speech many times, but she still felt nervous. The next few minutes would determine the rest of her life. "For 30 years, I believed that strength meant being hard and merciless," she began. "I thought compassion was weakness, and that enemies could never become friends. The storm on Keth Prime taught me that I was wrong about everything." She told them about Day's first act of kindness, giving up his jacket to save Kes. She described his dangerous journey to repair the heating systems. She explained how he had risked his life again to get medicine for a dying Kethany woman. "This human enemy had every reason to hate us," she continued. "We had killed his friends, destroyed his settlements, and held him prisoner. But when our children were dying, he chose to save them. Not because he had to, but because it was right. One individual's actions do not change the nature of our enemies," the chief judge said coldly. "But they change the nature of who we could become." Nara replied, "I saw Kethany and human children playing together as if war had never existed. I saw soldiers sharing food with people they had been ordered to hate. I saw what we could accomplish when we choose cooperation over conflict." "You saw weakness," General Wu interrupted. "You saw the corruption of our pure military values." "I saw strength," Nara said firmly. "The kind of strength that comes from protecting others instead of destroying them. The kind of strength that grows larger when it is shared instead of smaller." The tribunal deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, their faces showed no emotion. "Commander Nara," the chief judge said, "this tribunal finds you guilty of all charges. However, we recognize that extraordinary circumstances may call for extraordinary actions. Your sentence is exile from Kethany military service and banishment from all military worlds." Nara felt relief wash over her. She had expected execution. Exile meant she would lose everything she had worked for, but she would live. More importantly, she would be free to live according to her new understanding of strength and compassion. "There is one condition," the judge continued. Your offspring will remain in Kethany custody to receive proper military education. The corruption of human influence must not be allowed to spread to the next generation. No, Nara said immediately. Kes comes with me. That is not your choice to make, General Wu said with satisfaction. The offspring belongs to the state now. Nara felt rage and desperation fill her chest. They were going to take Kes away and turn her into the same kind of cold, merciless warrior that Nara had been. Everything her offspring had learned about compassion and cooperation would be crushed out of her. I invoked the right of family bond, Nara said suddenly. The judges looked surprised. The right of family bond was an ancient Kethany law that allowed a parent to choose exile with their offspring, rather than separation. It was almost never used because it meant giving up citizenship and protection of the empire. Are you certain? The chief judge asked. Once invoked, this right cannot be reversed. You and your offspring will be permanent exiles, with no legal standing in Kethany society. I am certain, Nara said without hesitation. My offspring and I choose exile together. 2 days later, Nara and Kes boarded a civilian transport ship, bound for the neutral world of Haven Station. It was a place where beings of all species lived and worked together in peace, as their ship left Kethany space forever. Kes pressed her face against the window to watch the stars. Are you sad to leave? Nara asked her offspring. A little, Kes said honestly, but I am excited to on Haven Station. We can be friends with anyone we want, human, or Kethany, or anyone else. Yes, Nara said, putting her arm around her offspring. We can choose compassion over conflict. We can choose to build instead of destroy. 6 months later, on Haven Station, Nara opened a small engineering firm that employed both humans and Kethany. Her first employee was a human engineer named Day, who had been released in a prisoner exchange and had chosen to settle on the neutral world. The three of them, Nara and Kes and Day, became an unusual family. They proved every day that former enemies could become not just friends, but people who cared deeply about each other's well-being. Word of their stories spread throughout the galaxy. Other Kethany began to question whether their harsh military philosophy truly served their people's best interests. Some humans started to believe that peace with the Kethany might actually be possible. The war between the two species did not end immediately. Wars that have lasted for years do not stop because of one story. But change had begun. Seeds of compassion had been planted in hearts on both sides. Years later, when historians wrote about the beginning of peace between humans and Kethany, they would trace it back to a storm on Keth Prime, to a moment when a human engineer chose to save the child of his enemy, to a Kethany commander who learned that true strength comes from protecting others, not destroying them. In her small apartment on Haven Station, Nara kept a piece of metal shaped like a star. It was the good luck charm that Kes had given to Day before his dangerous mission in the storm. He had returned it to them when he arrived on Haven Station, saying it had done its job. It brought me back to my family, he had said, and that was what they were now. A family bound not by blood or species, but by the choice to care about each other. A family that had learned the most important lesson in the universe. Love is stronger than hate. Compassion is stronger than fear. And sometimes, in the darkest storms, the light of kindness can change everything.